Hello, it's time for Friday Fromage from the Farm. Once again, I'm Kate Johnson from the Art of Cheese in Longmont, Colorado, located on Briargate Farm, my little dairy goat farm. And every Friday I bring you, well, most Fridays, I bring you this little cheese section. And so for those of you who might be new to me, I do run a little cheese making school here. I am really just a home cheesemaker. We are not a professional creamery. I'm just like any of you. I started making cheese, well, maybe a little differently. I started making cheese because I have dairy goats and I had a lot of milk I didn't know what to do with, and that's how my cheese making got started. But after years of doing that, I decided to open this little cheese making school. And so every Friday I tell you a little bit something about cheese or cheese making. Last week, if you happened to watch, I did a kind of Cheese Making 101 overview. I walked you through sort of the key ingredients and why we use them and so on. So if you missed that one, just go back and look at last week's video. And then last week, I kind of promised you that this week I would walk you through my cheese caves. So I'm going to do that today. So again, keeping in mind, I am just like any of you could be if you wanted to learn to make cheese. And my cheese caves are just wine and dorm refrigerators that I've outfitted to be the right environment for aging cheeses. So, it's kind of funny if you're in a room with a group of home cheesemakers and somebody asks, how many of you have a cheese cave? Everybody raises their hand and you're like, you have an actual cheese cave? Yeah, it's a dorm refrigerator. So that's what most of us are referring to. Most of us home cheesemakers don't actually have a cave, although I would like one, but most of us are making do with what we have. So the first part of today, I'm going to walk you through my cheese caves just so you can see what types of cheeses I'm in the process of making. I'm usually in the process of aging, somewhere between 8 and 20 cheeses at any given time. Now, some cheeses aren't aged, they are eaten fresh, and so those would not be in my caves. The only things in my caves are cheeses that have to age. And then also here in my classroom is where I make my cheeses. And again, these are my personal cheeses. They're not for sale, but they are how I learn to make a recipe so that I can teach you to make the recipe. So here in my classroom, I have a couple of cheeses that aren't in the caves yet because they're in an earlier process. And then at the end of today, I am going to do a little taste test. I previewed that on my social media earlier today of some flavor infusions I've been experimenting with. And I'm just going to do a live little taste test. Too bad you can't taste them, but I'll describe them to you and tell you which one I like best. And that has to do with the class I'm teaching this weekend, I believe tomorrow, on flavor infusions in a 3-day aged farmhouse cheese. All right, so let's go on our little tour. All right, I'm going to turn this around. Like I said, this is my classroom, which right now is just me. In fact, most of this year, it's been just me because of the wonderful pandemic. I've had to teach entirely virtually this year. So this is one of my cheese caves, quote unquote. It is a beverage refrigerator, and it is turned up to a warm setting so that it's around 50 to 55 degrees. And then I ran out of room, so this was my other cheese cave, which is another dorm fridge. Now, in this case, I could not get it warm enough. Even when I put this one on its warmest setting, it was still too cold for aging cheese. We need to be somewhere between probably 48 and 55 degrees to age most cheeses. So for this one, I've outfitted it with a controller. So you can see here, this is a little controller. They're very inexpensive to purchase. And you plug your refrigerator into the controller, plug the controller into the wall, and then you can set the temperature. So this one is set at around 52 degrees. And here's the little temperature probe down in here that monitors it. And the way it holds that temperature is just by cycling the refrigerator on and off. So as you will see in my cheese caves, I have a lot of containers because one of the things cheese needs besides the right temperature is the right humidity. And it's very hard to get a little dorm refrigerator like this to be a high enough humidity for most cheeses. The other issue is, and I'll just turn this back to me for a second, The other issue is that not all cheeses want the same humidity. And so I prefer to age in containers. I call them microclimates because I can control the individual humidity in each container. I also can keep cross-contamination from happening. Contamination in this case isn't necessarily a bad word, but what happens is sometimes certain microflora in your cheese cave that you might not want to be on all your cheeses can migrate around. So containers is the way I take care of this. Some people will try to get their cheese cave to a particular humidity level. Most cheeses, that's around 85%. It takes some doing to get a dorm fridge to that level of humidity. So just to give you an example of what I mean about a microclimate, this is something I'm aging right now. I actually have several of these. This is a class coming up in a few weeks for something called chaours. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'll have to look it up before the class. But this is a bloomy rind cheese, much like a brie or camembert. You can see all the condensation on this container. In fact, I have to wipe it out every day in order to keep it from getting too much. But these are cheeses that want a lot of humidity, and because in order to grow that bloomy rind. So what you can see here is a container that just has a little inverted lid in the bottom, a little piece of cheese mat, which is actually needlepoint fabric, and then that way it can sit up above the surface. And then you can see my little cheese, and you can see this is getting a beautiful little wrinkly rind that comes from the Geotrichum candidum that's in the milk, and it grows where it gets air at the right temperature and humidity. So these have to get flipped every day. I wipe out the excess moisture, but I want to make sure I have enough moisture that they'll do their thing. All right, so you can see here, this is just starting to get to be too much moisture where it's going to start dripping on the cheese. We don't want that, but this is a good example here. This is actually a bacon microwave container, believe it or not. Also very effective because it has a little tray that sits up above the bottom. And these are just the same cheese, but in a smaller size. And so you can see they're also coming along very nicely. In fact, this one, just by giving it a little squeeze, I'm going to eat this one this weekend. These, although they're smaller, they are drier, and so they're not aging quite as quickly. But at any rate, that's an example of some micro containers. So those are a couple things I'm aging in this fridge. Here's another example of a completely different style of cheese. This is a little cheesy experiment I have going on. Most of us home cheesemakers like to work, or we just do, I'd say most people work with actual freeze-dried cultures. But you can also make cheese out of kefir, which is another form of culture. So I'm doing a little experiment where I made the same cheese on the same day from the same milk, but with two different types of culture. One was thermophilic culture and one was kefir culture, and you can see they look quite different. They've been aging for a while. These are natural rind cheeses. They're supposed to be. This is all different kinds of molds that are growing naturally, not because I put anything in the milk other than the culture and the milk. So these have been aging since, September. You can see my wonderful filing system, which is basically sticky notes. These I'm going to let age for at least 6 months, maybe a little longer, before I cut into them. All right, then another little example of, here's an example of cheese that basically was ready, and I ate some of it, but I decided to just let it keep aging for a little while longer. This is an Emmental. This is one I aged without much of a natural rind. That's actually the more proper way to age this cheese. It's a kind of like Swiss cheese, but I'll show you that I don't always follow the proper rules. This is another bigger one of this cheese that I let develop a natural rind. So instead of cleaning up the rind and wiping it with brine and keeping it nice and clean like this one, I decided to just let this one run a bit wild. And the reason for that is because one time I accidentally did that by basically neglecting the cheese. And I have to tell you, I thought it was the best Emmental I'd ever made. And so I sometimes do it intentionally now. All right, so that just gives you a little look. Then you'll see in the back of my cheese aging fridge are some things that are vacuum sealed. These basically are all little wedges of cheeses that are finished aging for the most part. I cut into them to eat them a little while ago, but then I decided, they could use a little more time, and I aged little pieces of them. This is a Manchego style cheese, although I call it Cabrego because it's made out of goat milk. At any rate, I wanted them to age a little longer, but when I open them, I only want to eat a little bit at a time. So I aged them in little pieces. All right, we'll put some of these things back away and we'll go over to the other aging cave. So you can see lots of experiments, lots of different types of cheeses. And then over here on the top row, you'll see again a whole bunch of cheeses that are vacuum sealed. Some of them are ready to eat, and I may have already eaten part of them, and I'm just letting them age a little longer, and so on. So vacuum sealing is really easy because you don't have to tend to them. You can just put them in there. I call it fix it and forget it. All right, here's another little example of a cheese in a container. These are Cambozola. So if you're familiar with that cheese, it's kind of a crossover between Camembert and Gorgonzola. And you'll see here again, I have very detailed notes. One of these is goat milk, one is from Origin milk. That's a really nice cow milk. And I've got some notes of when I started them. Now, ideally, you would have this information in more detail on a make sheet. And sometimes I do have that, but just at first glance, I want to have the information. So you'll see these, you can tell this is the goat milk, it's very white, and this is the nice high quality cow milk that's nice and golden. And you'll notice that these all have some little pierce marks because these are going to develop a little bit of blue mold on the inside, but they're gonna get a nice white fuzzy mold on the outside. So every day I have to flip those a little bit and make sure they're not too wet. And then behind there, you'll see more little wrapped cheeses that are just aging with not needing any attention. Those are actually the easiest kind. And then here I've got a little Asiago pepato. This is, you all know what Asiago is. This one has peppercorns in it. And this one is really actually probably ready to eat. So I will probably get this one out soon. You can see the peppercorns in there. Has a little bit of mold on the outer edge. This is supposed to be a clean rind cheese, but sometimes a little mold gets on there. Won't hurt anything, just gives it a little more flavor. Down here, you'll see a little Fontina. You'll notice a lot of mine say goat, well, because as you know, I have goats, and many of these cheeses are traditionally made with cow milk, but because I have goats, I make a lot of cheeses that aren't normally a goat milk cheese out of goat milk. So here's a real pretty little Fontina that this is getting a little washed rind. This has a little Brevibacterium linen starting to develop. And then here is another little experiment. And these are some tomes that I made. That's just basically a little wheel of hard cheese. And one I did with pasteurized goat milk with kefir as the culture. Here, I'll get these out. And one I did with raw milk. So again, I'm just doing a little taste test example. These look pretty similar, but we're gonna see if they taste very differently once they're done aging. I'm letting these go as long as I can hold out until they start looking too dry. Again, I'm keeping them with lids on to hold that moisture in, but they are little wheels and eventually they'll start to dry out a bit and I'll cut into them then. All right, and then last but not least, my big goat blue Stilton. This is probably my gnarliest looking cheese right now. It's actually looking pretty awesome. So this is a blue cheese, and it gets pretty interesting, this rind, and I'm very happy with how this one's looking, to tell you the truth. Sometimes this one gets a little too wet, and it has to spend a little time with the lid off, but it's at a stage right now where it's doing pretty good. All right, so there you have it. That's my two cheese caves. I do actually have a third cheese cave in the basement, but it's not all that interesting. They're just all vacuum sealed cheeses that out of sight, out of mind, I just leave them for a while. All right, so those are examples of a homemade cheese cave. And, you know, a lot of times it just takes a little trial and error. That's why I call my business The Art of Cheese, because there is a dance. It's an art. You know, we're trying to figure out what that cheese needs. We're basically trying to become cheese whisperers when we're making cheese. What I mean by that is we're waiting for the cheese to tell us what it needs. And so a lot of times if your cheese caves are somewhere where you hang out a lot, you're gonna remember to check in on them regularly, and they're gonna tell you what they need by how they're behaving. So what you see, sometimes it might be smell. For me, most of the time, it's what's happening with the rind and how much humidity is in the box. And then they're telling you what you need to do. And that just takes experience and experimenting. A lot of times I like to say it takes about 3 times making one recipe to kind of start to get how it's gonna work in your environment. Because frankly, I mean, a dorm refrigerator with a Tupperware container isn't a very sophisticated cheese cave. And so I have to figure out, you know, exactly how to tweak things to make it work. All right, if you happen to have any questions about any of this, at any time, feel free to email me, kate@theartofcheese.com, or info@theartofcheese.com. That's the best way to get questions to me quickly. I never answer the phone, so. All right, now, back to our little taste test. So these are 4 cheeses that I made, just about a week or so ago. And they're part of a class I'm doing on a quick aging cheese that lends itself well to flavor infusions. So in addition to teaching how to make this cheese, we talk about lots of different ways you can infuse the flavors. You can see I have one fairly big wheel. This was a gallon of milk. And then these 3 are much, much smaller because frankly, I just didn't want a whole lot of this cheese because these were just little experiments. And so I made these tiny wheels. So the first one that I want to try, this was an infusion technique that's kind of fun. It's where you make basically a flavored tea. You can do it either with water or you can do it with some of the milk that you're using to make the cheese. I'm trying to cut one-handed here, and we'll see how that works. So what this one was during the stage that it was still milk in the pot, I added a flavored tea, which basically was rosemary and garlic steeping in very warm water. And then I poured that water into the milk and continued making the cheese. Now I did it that way because I didn't want a lot of rosemary pieces. I wanted a few just for the color. So I did let a few of them go into the milk, but I wanted it mostly to just be a white cheese. So I'm gonna taste this one. Oh yeah, you can totally taste the rosemary. It doesn't look like there's a lot in there, but the thing that's nice about flavor infusions is that they really intensify the flavor in a cheese. It's delicious. Actually, I really like that one better than I would have expected. Sometimes I find rosemary flavored cheeses to be a little overpowering, and that's why I chose to do this one this way. Now, this next one, which is one I'm really excited about, this I'm calling it drunken curd. So the way I flavor infused this one was that while it was still in the curd stage, I soaked the curds in some wine. And for this one, I just used whatever red wine was open at my house. And then I went ahead and pressed those curds. And look how pretty that is on the inside. So in addition to getting some wine flavor in there, it also just makes for a very pretty cheese on a cheese plate. And so I'll taste that one. Oh yeah, it's very winey, but not overpowering. I actually really like that. That turned out really yummy. All right, now the next 2, you can see they look kind of similar except different sizes. These are fun, and I saw my friend Joe was on here watching, so this was a present from my friend Joe. Savory spice, and many spice shops do this, but this is a really fun one. A lot of them will do these flavor combinations with different herbs. And the important thing for cheese making, for the most part, you want salt-free because we're going to add our salt in a different way and at a different time. So this one's called Catanzaro herbs. And you can see here it's garlic, lemon peel, marjoram, basil, Mediterranean thyme, rosemary, and oregano. Yum. So because these were pretty big pieces and I'm putting it in a pretty small wheel, I decided to steep these first in some hot liquid, just enough, not to make a tea, just to rehydrate these dried herbs. So that's what I put in this wheel. And, it's just one way that you can add in some dried herbs by actually getting them reconstituted before you put them in. And then you also get a little bit of the flavor in the water that you've reconstituted them. So you can see that's kind of pretty. We'll give that a taste. Oh yeah, the garlic really comes through on that one. If you love garlic, this is a great one. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge garlic fan. So to me, this one is a little too garlicky, although very good. And then my favorite new name of an herb blend is Bohemian Forest. So I just love that name so much that really I didn't care what was in it. I just thought the name was great. But it's interesting too. Crushed brown mustard seed, garlic, rosemary, black pepper, again some thyme, savory, parsley, lavender, and sage. It does sound rather bohemian, doesn't it? So I did this one because these were really little flecks of herbs. I decided to just put this straight in as a dry herb blend into my curds. I didn't make a tea. I didn't rehydrate them. I just added them directly to the curds. And we'll see how that one turned out. Very good. Actually quite delicious. Again, probably a little more garlic than my taste, but if you are a garlic lover, both of those are super good. I'd say the rosemary garlic one is least garlic, and that probably suits my taste better. Which kind of brings me to the final piece of all this, is the fun thing about making your own cheese is you can make it the way you want it, right? So like I showed you that little Emmental I have in there that's got this wild natural rind, it's not right. I mean, that's not how that cheese is supposed to age, but it's my cheese. And when I did it that way one time before accidentally, I loved it. So guess what? I just do it that way on purpose now. So similarly with different flavorings and different profiles, you can really customize your cheeses to be what you want, which is really, to me, the most fun part about being a home cheesemaker. Plus the fact that I know the goats that gave me the milk for most of this cheese. Most of those goats I've raised since they were babies, and that makes it even more fun. I also know exactly what went into that cheese. There's no surprises in my cheese. I haven't added any other kinds of additives or preservatives or antifungal agents or anything like that. So that's Friday Fromage from the farm for this week. If you are new to cheese making and you're interested in learning how to make cheese, do check us out, www.theartofcheese.com. And we do offer a huge array of virtual classes right now. Someday we'll get back to doing some in-person classes too, but you can actually become a certified home cheesemaker, even just taking virtual classes. You do have to prove to us you made the cheese and tell us what you learned, but that's kind of a fun thing too. We also have a cheese making membership club, which is a way to get discounts and some free classes and all kinds of fun. And some maybe enhanced mentoring. We will always answer questions though via email of any of our students or even the general population. So, all right, thank you so much for joining me. Come back again next Friday. I don't know what the topic will be. If you have any requests, feel free to send them my way. And now I'm gonna hop over to my Instagram channel and do this all again. Okay, have a great day, everybody. Have a great weekend too. Stay warm if you're in Colorado. It's gonna be cold. All right, bye-bye.